Good day, men. This night we start with the weird, bold, and once in a while eyebrow-free world of medieval splendor standards. A global where the aim wasn't to look healthful, however, as a substitute like someone who'd just been in a well-mannered way exercised. So before you get at ease, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but most effective in case you in reality revel in what I do right here. And let me recognize in the remarks wherein you are tuning in from, and what time it's miles for you. It's continually captivating to look who is joining us from round the arena. Now dim the lighting, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and permits ease into tonight's adventure collectively. Within the medieval global, searching light wasn't a signal which you wished greater sleep. It became a fashion announcement, a social flex, a silent announcement to the arena that said, I am too wealthy to ever see the solar. Thanks very a good deal. Not like today, where a healthful glow would possibly suggest yoga, smoothies, or an experience to the coast. Medieval splendor flipped the script. Tan pores and skin that supposed you labored out of doors, which supposed you had been terrible, which intended gasp, manual exertions, and nothing stated now not lovely inside the 14th century, like knowing how to milk a cow. So the paler you were, the better your perceived reputation. And while we say faded, we do not mean a soft ivory glow. We're talking translucent porcelain with vascular undertones. Skin so light it gave the impression of you may had been recently startled by using a ghost or were a ghost. Of course, nature would not always cooperate, specifically in case you had been born with an real running circulatory gadget. So human beings helped it along. Noble girls or even guys now and again would follow white lead powder to their faces. It furnished that signature corpse chic glow, and as a bonus slowly poisoned you. But splendor has always had its price. Some would use vinegar-soaked cloth to bleach their pores and skin. Others carried out an aggregate of crushed pearls and egg whites, which no longer handiest lighten the face, however, additionally, had the aspect impact of making one's cheeks sense like a stale omelet. Veins had been now and again painted onto the palms and chest, using blue pigment to simulate delicacy, because nothing says noble like pretending your skin is set to split open. Even literature got in on it. Romantic poems described ladies as pale as milk, white as snow, and once one as the moon in wintry weather. That is a pleasing way of pronouncing she seems like she would possibly faint. I love it. This light aesthetic wasn't just about splendor. It turned into shorthand for sophistication, purity, an entire economic disengagement with agriculture. If you could have the funds for to be fragile, you were prevailing. Beauty in the Middle Ages often required dedication. And via dedication, we imply a sluggish, decorative shape of chemical conflict on yourself. Because for those striving to achieve that prestigious faded complexion, nature just wasn't sufficient. In order that they reached for makeup, specially lead-based white face powder. Yes, lead, as within the issue we now seal off vintage homes for. But back then it changed into considered slicing aspect. The end result become a smooth, faded, matte end, the medieval equivalent of hide foundation. It made the pores and skin appearance flawless, and eventually experience very now not faultless. White lead powder changed into made through combining vinegar and metal, then permitting it to corrode right into a white crust that would be floor right into a best powder. Follow that each day and voila, you looked like a luminous, delicate aristocrat with a mystery demise wish. And if your skin started to flake, blister, or fall off in small diplomatic chunks, even better. It intended the makeup turned into working. In all likelihood, this wasn't a one-product routine both. Many added mercury, primarily based rouge for shade or chalk dust for more staying electricity. Egg whites have been brushed over the face for a smooth, glazed appearance. Essentially, if it got here from a barn or an alchemist's shelf, a person had rubbed it on their face in the name of beauty. The downside, aside from the plain sluggish poisoning, lead-based products brought on the whole lot from persistent fatigue and pores and skin, ulcers to hair loss and untimely dying, which is not listed on most present-day skincare labels. However, the fashion continued because if the selection was between dying slowly and being wrong for a peasant, nobility frequently selected the scenic route to the grave. Men weren't continually immune either. Some male courtiers extensively utilized powders or skin remedies, especially within the later medieval and early Renaissance courts, where picture mattered nearly as a good deal as lineage, or as a minimum as a whole lot as smelling less terrible than your rival. Of all the medieval beauty tendencies, the obsession with high foreheads may be the most eyebrow-raising, literally, due to the fact people have been casting off their eyebrows for it. A tall, smooth, uninterrupted brow wasn't simply elegant. It became taken into consideration elegant, wise, and divine. It changed into the architectural surprise of the medieval face. The best forehead stated, "I spend my days analyzing psalms and searching pensively out of fortress home windows. No longer I vary own a shovel." To obtain this noble look, girls went to severe and admittedly itchy measures. Eyebrows had been plucked out completely, and now and again, even scalp hair was removed inch by using inch to push the hairline further returned. This wasn't a trim. This was a full-on brow growth challenge. Medieval grooming manuals suggested girls to use tweezers, hot cloths, and depilatory lotions crafted from such things as cat dung, brief lime, or vinegar-soaked leeches, all within the call of showcasing a forehead that could double as a sundial. The outcomes have been placing. Photos from the time display women with serene expressions and foreheads, so enormous you may host a joust on them. Mixed with light skin and gentle facial capabilities, this high-dome aesthetic became shorthand for delicate splendor. It wasn't all approximately the face either. Style supported this look. Tight becoming hoods, wimples, and hennons, the once famous cone-shaped hats, all helped pull the hairline up, or at the least hide the part in which your eyebrows used to stay. And this wasn't only a few isolated fortress fashion. From England to France to Italy, noble women leaned into the high-brow style, even as artists and poets reinforced it by praising women whose faces started out someplace near the crown of the head. Of course, not absolutely everyone ought to afford the time or tools to pluck themselves into perfection. So, in a moment of medieval ingenuity, a few ladies faked it by drawing their new brow slightly better and covering the relaxation with headbands or veils. It is proper. The middle a long time had their personal model of contouring. It just worried loads greater cloth. In medieval Europe, eyebrows were not simply underappreciated. They had been actively eliminated. Cutting-edge trends may rejoice bold brows, feathered arches, and TikTok tutorials. However, inside the 14th and 15th centuries, eyebrows have been visible as useless facial clutter. To attain the right appearance, girls plucked their eyebrows into close to non-life styles or erased them completely. Why? Due to the fact a naked smooth brow become considered elegant and delicate, and any sign of real hair increase interrupted the aesthetic. Eyebrows had been basically seen as cussed weeds at the lawn of the face. Some went even further and shaved the forehead region completely, ensuring that not an unmarried strand interfered with their alabaster-hide glory. It's the form of commitment that would make cutting-edge splendor influencers blink 2 times, primarily due to the fact there were no brow pencils to attract them again in. To put off the brows, medieval girls used tweezers, wax, pumice stones, or for the mainly brave, mixtures containing quicklime, vinegar, or arsenic. Sure, arsenic. Due to the fact nothing says dedication on your appear to be risking mild facial melting. This become extra than just a passing fad. Art from the length, from illuminated manuscripts to oil pics, confirms the fashion. Noble girls are frequently depicted with smooth foreheads and expressionless eyes, framed through not anything but skin. The result is either serene or slightly alien. Relies upon on the lighting fixtures. Interestingly, the no-brow fashion wasn't totally uniform. In a few components of Europe, skinny or gently arched brows persevered, specifically as affects from the Middle East and Byzantine Empire filtered through trade and struggle. But by means of and big, the message became clear. If people can see your eyebrows, you are doing it incorrect. And this wasn't just for girls. Men, particularly those close to court life, occasionally trimmed or groomed their brows as a part of a larger aesthetic of refinement, though complete removal changed into uncommon among males, until they'd lost them in a specifically heated theological debate. What this all tells us is that medieval beauty ideals weren't about looking natural. They had been about searching curated, symbolic, and just a piece angelic. Angels, in any case, rarely have brows in art. Coincidence? In all likelihood, however it worked for them. Within the middle, a long time, having a hint of color on your cheeks changed into desirable. However, like most matters in medieval existence, there have been policies, social dangers, and an indistinct threat of damnation. The perfect turned into a diffused blush, like you simply heard a mildly scandalous poem or stepped exterior for 30 seconds, however not lengthy enough to tan. Heaven forbid. A mild rose hue at the cheeks counseled children, fertility, and preferred survival. All matters that had been considered appealing, especially if you may keep them past the age of 28. However, you could not seem like you had been attempting. Making use of rouge changed into considered useless, and conceitedness became suspiciously close to sin. The church become now not amused via girls smearing color on their faces, unless of course they have been the aristocracy or doing it humbly. That is a theological gray vicinity scholars are nevertheless seeking to outline. Nonetheless, girls improvised. Commonplace blush components included beetroot juice, crushed strawberries, mulberries, or even coin, a deep crimson pigment made from crushed insects. Sure, insects. Because beauty has by no means been type. A few rubbed their cheeks to get that herbal flush, whilst others used combinations of purple ochre or wine sediment dabbed cautiously to keep away from detection with the aid of both clergy and judgmental neighbors. For the rich, rouge may be made from crimson lead or cinnabar, each of which had been fantastically poisonous. But the logic went something like, I may die young, however I'll die purple-cheeked and socially respected. Rouge became usually carried out with fabric, hands, or something tool was available that hadn't just been used to season a stew. Replicate access turned into limited. Such a lot of ladies relied on instinct, muscle memory, or the occasional honest maid. Of path in case your blush was too seen, you might be accused of imitating prostitutes or worse, French courtiers. The horror. The goal was usually modest enhancement, now not theatrical assertion. And if a person complimented your glow, you were expected to deny the entirety and mutter something about the wind. Even nuns every so often wore a hint of rouge discreetly, and supposedly most effective on ceremonial dinner days. Because nothing says, I serve the Lord, like a tasteful dab of beetroot behind the cloister. In medieval Europe, if your hair failed to appear to be it were kissed with the aid of holy mild or stolen from a bottle angel, you have been already beginning from in the back of. Blonde hair in particular became the medieval gold trendy. It turned into associated with kids, splendor, distinctive feature, and if you needed divine backup. The Virgin Mary changed into regularly painted as a blonde, despite the fact that she changed into geographically talking nearly definitely not. But realism changed into less crucial than radiance. If you were born blonde, congratulations. You had been taken into consideration, blessed, and possibly got out of a few chores. But herbal blondness did not ultimate, mainly in adulthood. So medieval ladies took matters into their very own arms, and every so often cauldrons. Self-made hair lightening concoctions blanketed saffron, chamomile, ash, honey, and lye. Carried out liberally, then left to bake beneath the sun in a technique known as sunbasking. It labored exceptional in case you had the persistence of a nun and the pores and skin of a salamander. Some recipes also protected urine, which became idea to assist lift color. Whose urine? That element become much less regulated. However, as lengthy as it gave your hair that celestial shimmer, it changed into deemed well worth it. Splendor is, and usually has been, a bit disgusting. Hair texture mattered too. Free, lengthy, wavy locks were the proper, preferably cascading down your lower back like a divine curtain. However, this luxury became reserved for unmarried girls. As soon as married, your golden mane was to be hidden below veils, nets, and head wraps. Due to the fact apparently the instant you stated, "I do," your hair became a country-wide protection hazard. For noble ladies, hair changed into regularly braided, twisted, or tucked into elaborate styles, specifically when attending court docket or religious activities. Those hairstyles have been frequently accessorized with silk ribbons, beads, or embroidery, simply in case you had to remind the room you failed to shear sheep for a reciting. Guys weren't unnoticed either. Even as now not quite as judged, men with thick golden locks were regularly romanticized in poetry and artwork. Knights with flowing hair charging into warfare were the medieval version of shampoo advertisements. In medieval Europe, hair turned into lots like money. If you had it, you did not always show it off unless you have been trying to get married. Then unexpectedly, it became a strategic asset. Unmarried ladies had been recommended to put on their hair long and free as a symbol of purity and innocence, though now not too free, unless you had been going for the ethereal forest maiden look, which become only socially ideal in case you have been, say, an actual saint or being martyred. In any other case, a gentle braid could suffice. However, once married, your hair became right now banished from public view. Congratulations! You now had a husband and a responsibility to wrap your locks tighter than a monastery's wine price range. Enter the sector of veils, wimples, nets, and kifs. A medieval wardrobe of modesty that would make even the maximum radiant blonde disappear beneath 3 layers of beige linen. Those coverings were not just modest, they had been practical. They included hair from smoke, lice, and unsolicited compliments from troubadours. The most dedicated girls layered their coverings. A coif, a close-fitting cap, is probably worn underneath a veil that can then be pinned under a wimple that wrapped below the chin. The effect you gave the look of a pious, well-bundled sandwich, and that was the goal. But fashion is not often satisfied with simply feature. As time went on, headwear were given more intricate. Nets had been embroidered with gold thread. Veils have been starched into geometric shapes. Some noble ladies wore silken cages for their braids, accessorized with jewels and tiny bells, due to the fact not anything says subtle beauty like jingling whilst you turn your head. In many cultures, concealed hair became tied to morality. A blanketed head turned into seen as modest and virtuous. Uncovered hair on a married lady, but should get you compared to a girl of the night time or worse, a French girl. Of root, a few ladies rebelled. They could permit a touch curl slip out or put on translucent veils that technically counted as blanketed, while still letting the arena respect their cautiously dyed strands. Medieval loopholes have been alive and properly. If medieval beauty had one unstated rule, it was this: taller is nobler. And we are now not speak me approximately your legs. With the aid of the 15th century, women across Europe started embracing a fashion that quite actually improved their appearance. The hennin, the only, the ones towering cane-shaped hats that gave the impression of they had been designed via someone who spent too much time around church steeples. The hennin wasn't just headwear. It became a social ladder you wore. Those hats could reach upwards of 2 feet. Every now and then even greater, in particular some of the French and Burgundian elite. The taller the hennin, the better your status, and the more doorways you smacked into on your way to dinner. Regularly made from first-rate silk, velvet, or brocade, hennins had been established with cord frames, giving them that dangerously aerodynamic form. A sheer veil normally cascaded from the tip, adding motion, mystery, and a good hazard of having stuck in candles. Now, getting your hair to match beneath certainly, one of this stuff changed into an artwork in itself. Hair became braided and stuffed up into the cone, or on occasion, absolutely shaved around the forehead. Forehead real property once more, to help the hennin take a seat properly. Comfort was no longer part of the design quick, but hennins weren't the best vertical obsession. A few ladies wore heart-shaped escapons, which gave the impression of 2 croissants glued to both aspects of the pinnacle, or butterfly hennins, wherein veils have been spread out like wings. Tremendous for drama, now not a lot for rain. Out of doors of the aristocracy, maximum women caught with veils, linen caps, or surlets. Less complicated, less risky, and less possibly to be unsuitable for a siege weapon. Clergy and conservative thinkers, as predicted, have been much less than enthused. They warned that such ostentation invited vanity, sin, and possibly neck strain. Still, hennins remained famous amongst folks who could afford them, just like most terrible but fashionable thoughts for the duration of history. And whilst men didn't put on towering cones, they had their personal style statements. Suppose feathered caps, fur-trimmed hoods, and pointy footwear that would double as fencing device. In medieval times, a lady's best frame wasn't meant to be athletic, curvy, or toned. No, the intention was to appear delicate, demure, and likely convalescing from a fainting spell. The correct discern becomes slim, smooth, and barely ethereal, like someone who lived on honey water, courtly poems, and possibly one parent week. Beauty manuals did not endorse girls to build electricity or endurance. The best lifting anticipated of you was lifting your veil in a flirtatious gesture, earlier than unexpectedly searching away, and maybe swooning. But this wasn't approximately searching sickly, as a minimum not glaringly. The sweet spot turned into someplace among too vulnerable to hold a bucket and still able to play the lute whilst sitting. A swish, willowy parent changed into related to the aristocracy. Due to direction, if you had been running, you'd have broader shoulders, stronger fingers, and the misfortune of muscle tone. The emphasis become on a slender waist, smooth curves, and a trendy air of spiritual exhaustion. Waistlines on dresses were regularly cinched just below the bust, an early model of the empire waist to lengthen the torso and deliver the phantasm of height and fragility. And if that illusion needed assist, tight lacing changed into available. Now not pretty corsets, the ones got here later. However, tightly bound kirtles and sur did the job simply fine. Being too thin, however, wasn't the purpose either. In times of famine or plague, being very skinny was a red flag, as in that character is probably actively dying. A small trace of roundness, mainly within the face or hips, changed into taken into consideration healthful and fertile. Essentially, in case you looked like you can live to tell the tale wintry weather and nevertheless be poetic, you had been within the candy spot. Weight loss program recommendation from the time wasn't exactly balanced. Splendor manuals advocated things like ingesting fennel for digestion, rose petals for breath, and ingesting wine to improve complexion. Protein handiest if it had a feather still connected. Men, then again, have been allowed to have more substance, broad shoulders, sturdy legs, and the potential to hold a sword without toppling over. However, even then, nobility favored a lean body with subtle posture, not brute strength. In the center, a long time, a lady's eyes have been her silent energy. The medieval model of sending a flirty emoji, simplest with more non-secular implications, and barely much less blinking. The correct medieval eyes were big, clear, and soulful, the type that regarded to whisper, "I am complete of virtue, and maybe only a hint of melancholy." Consider eyes that appeared as though they'd, in my opinion, witnessed the fall of man, and have been none the less courteously recovering. Poets of the period could not get sufficient of them. They defined eyes as luminous orbs, dewdrops of heaven, or swimming pools of pure devotion. What they hardly ever said changed into bloodshot, allergy-ridden, or I was up all night churning butter. Light-colored eyes, blue or gray, have been frequently idealized in Northern Europe, related to innocence, purity, and the overall assumption which you hadn't seen too many annoying matters, or at least pretended no longer to. In Southern Europe, darker eyes had been widespread, too, mainly in the event that they came paired with a noble lineage and an excellent dowry. Enhancing the eyes turned into hard. There have been no medieval eyeliner pens, just charcoal soot and optimism. Some girls dabbed a touch black powder across the lashes to make the eye's appearance larger, risking infection, blurry, imaginative, and prescient, or beginning the world's first unintended smoky eye. But maximum ladies relied on nature and strategic lighting fixtures. Want to appearance greater wittied. Stand near a candle. Need to look virtuous. appearance downward at all times, even in case you ride over the cat. Curiously, slightly terrary eyes have been famous. It suggested emotional sensitivity, piety, and perhaps which you simply completed praying or reading something uplifting, like a 300-line poem approximately chastity. Artificial tears weren't to be had, but staring directly into smoke or enduring moderate public humiliation normally did the trick. As for eye contact, it changed into a delicate dance. Too much can be seen as bold, flirtatious, or suspiciously French. Too little, and also you risk seeming shifty or possessed. The trick became to now and again look up from beneath reduced lids, like someone who'd memorized the Bible however wasn't approximately to gloat. Allows talk about something not often referred to in medieval love poetry. Breath, particularly what it smelled like. Whilst a knight would possibly wax lyrical approximately his female's rose-bud lips or pearl-like tooth, he commonly ignored what befell when the one's lips opened. It really is because medieval dental hygiene become at quality an aspirational concept, and minty freshness wasn't invented but. Except you depend standing close to a herb lawn and hopping for the excellent. Nonetheless, fresh breath was technically taken into consideration desirable. A gentle, sweet-smelling mouth hinted at youngsters' health, and which you in all likelihood hadn't eaten garlic and eels for breakfast, even though statistically you had. Medieval girls did what they could. They chewed parsley, fennel seeds, cloves, cinnamon sticks, and on occasion twigs. Not only for the taste, but to keep the mouth tolerable. Think about it as the prement model of gum. It didn't sparkle your enamel, but it made you slightly greater kissable, or at least less terrifying in close communication. For people with get right of entry to apothecaries, there were also natural pastes and mouth rinses crafted from sage, vinegar, and myrrh. Those had been implemented sparingly, each due to the fact they have been high-priced, and because starting your mouth too huge in public become considered a bit much. Toothbrushing, as we understand it, wasn't widespread. Instead, human beings wiped their tooth with cloth, rubbed them with chalk or beaten herbs, or used chunk sticks, small fibrous twigs that might scrub and double as something to fidget with even as your suitor recited bad poetry. And while ptosis wasn't precisely romantic, it wasn't taken into consideration surprising both. In the end, every body had horrific breath to some diploma, and all of them had larger problems, like surviving iciness or fending off being burned as a heretic. For noble ladies, the trick became to minimize offense whilst preserving grace. Conversations came about at arm's length. Public affection turned into restrained. And when doubtful, fan yourself and look contemplative. Bonus factors in case you carried a small pomander, a scented orb full of herbs to wave gently to your personal direction as wished. Nowadays, an excellent smile can launch 1,000 relationship apps. Inside the Middle Ages, a grin became a risky enterprise, great used sparingly, like spices or peasant revolts. Why? Well, medieval dental hygiene wasn't precisely flourishing. Teeth were crucial, sure, but greater for chewing bread than charming suitors. Most of the people had enamel that ranged from slightly questionable to actively terrifying, in particular by means of age 30. So the fewer human beings noticed them, the higher. This wasn't totally due to negligence. Teeth decay became rampant thanks to diets heavy in bread, porridge, and mead, and lacking in toothbrushes, dental floss, or actually any type of fluoride. Sugar wasn't widely fed on, but in maximum of Europe. However, even fundamental starches broke down into enamel tarnishing misery. Additionally, dental surgical procedure at the time was basically an exorcism with pliers. Notwithstanding this, a healthy smile became quietly well known, just no longer loudly celebrated. White, even teeth had been uncommon and visible as a mark of adolescence and fortune, and perhaps a miracle. But human beings weren't going round flashing massive toothy grins like medieval toothpaste commercials. In fact, a demure closed-lip smile turned into some distance extra elegant. Suppose I is probably taking into consideration a sonnet in preference to I am thrilled to be right here. A few women even used powders made of sage, salt, or ground-up coral to attempt to ease or whiten their teeth. Those methods were mildly powerful and frequently abrasive. Consider brushing with sand and hopping for the high quality. However universal, tooth were tolerated, now not flaunted. Medieval art, as an example, almost in no way depicts open-mouthed smiles. Even saints and angels usually keep their mouths politely closed, as though they too had been quietly aware of the dangers of displaying murs. Guys were not immune both. A knight would possibly win the heart of a lady together with his bravery and chiseled jawline. However, no ballad ever covered the road. Hispids gleamed like ivory. There may be a purpose troubadour saying approximately eyes, hair, and hands, now not breath and bite alignment. Whilst it got here to medieval beauty requirements for guys, the expectancies had been oddly unique. You didn't need to be chiseled like a Greek statue, but you furthermore could not appear like you would simply fallen off a hay cart. The candy spot was someplace between ready to joust, and could write a poem approximately jousting without clearly doing it. The proper man changed into tall, lean, huge-shouldered, and very importantly, nobly unbothered. Now not overly muscular, that suggested labor, but now not smooth either. That suggested laziness or too much me. You desired to look like you may swing a sword, however simplest if the squire turned into busy. A defined jawline, excessive cheekbones, and a straight nose were all considered appealing. Suppose prints in an illuminated manuscript, as opposed to village strongman. A well-groomed beard, or an easy clean-shaven face, turned into ideal relying at the location and technology. But both manner, it needed to look intentional, now not such as you'd been lost in the woods for a week. Hair became usually shoulder period and styled, mainly for noblemen. Curls had been in fashion in many courts, especially in the event that they happened clearly or gave the impression of they did. A few guys even used curling irons. Yes, virtually. Small heated rods or herbal rinses to beautify texture and shine. Because nothing says I'm above manual labor, like sitting for 45 minutes whilst your page boy styles your fringe. Clothing played a large role in enhancing the male silhouette. Padded shoulders, cinched waists, and equipped tunics helped create the appropriate frame form with more emphasis on posture. A nobleman did not slouch. He glided, often with a touch of disdain. And if a man did show up to be certainly muscular, that turned into quality, so long as he wasn't caught clearly working with the one's muscle tissues. Fighting in wars become suited. Hauling barrels become not. Especially, the look become effortless. You were not purported to attempt to be appealing. You were sincerely born noble. And that alone made you appealing. A sort of medieval version of hot without attempting, except in preference to a fitness center membership. You inherited land and a falcon. In a technology where bathing was technically non-compulsory, and plumbing became in general a dream with a Latin call, heady scent control have become an art form. And now not the glamorous stroll through a cloud of Chanel-wide variety 5 sort of artwork, more the Mazet and Prey range. To be fair, humans did bathe, simply not as frequently as we would wish, in particular depending at the century, place, and plague frequency. So to maintain from offending nostrils, human and divine, medieval women and men grew to become to the electory electricity of herbs, oils, and fragrance pouches. Let's begin with the commander. A small whole ball made of metallic worn on a sequence or pinned to clothing, and full of strongly scented herbs like cloves, rosemary, cinnamon, sage, and every now and then something ominously labeled powder of roses. Those weren't just for elegance. They had been transportable smell shields. Consider them because the medieval version of taking walks round with a freezy grenade. The nobility also preferred perfumed gloves, handkerchiefs, or even scented combs. Everything turned into fair recreation for aroma enhancement, such as hair, which become from time to time doused with floral waters or vinegar infusions that smelled slightly better than sweat and desperation. Speaking of sweat, yes, humans really sweated. Medieval garments had been heavy, summers have been warm, and deodorant turned into still numerous centuries far away from reinventing armpits. The solution, layers of linen, which absorbed sweat and might be washed greater frequently than the woolen or silk outer clothes. Some introduced herbal sachets to their below layers, hopping to fight scent with fragrant optimism. Baths were a element, in particular for the duration of the early medieval and overdue medieval intervals, however get entry to varied wildly. The Church subsequently frowned upon communal nudity, which clearly placed a damper on hygiene enthusiasm. Such a lot of turn to dry bathing, which is exactly as unrefreshing because it sounds. Wiping yourself with a cloth, then spritzing on scented water and pretending that counted. And then there were the overachievers, Folks that kept flower petals of their footwear or crammed herbs in their mattress linens to smell vaguely like someone who had currently seen a garden. In medieval Europe, splendor wasn't just pores and skin deep. It changed into morally loaded. A properly composed face may be a divine blessing, a social weapon, or an entice set via the devil himself. Now and again, all three before breakfast. To be stunning turned into to walk a totally satisfactory line. On one hand, bodily splendor, clear skin, symmetrical capabilities, faded complexion, turned into taken into consideration a signal of virtue. If you have been lovable, it intended you had been blessed, probable chosen through God, or a minimum of unlikely to scouse borrow sheep. Poets, preachers, and painters alike described splendor as proof of a natural soul. But there was a seize. If you knew you were beautiful, or worse, if you used that beauty on your benefit, you right now have become suspect. Vanity become a sin, don't forget. And displaying too much hobby in one's look hinted at satisfaction, seduction, or worst of all, French tendencies. Medieval sermons warned that girls' beauty ought to tempt guys into sin, which of root turned into entirely the female's fault. Eve set a precedent, and medieval Europe ran with it for a solid 1,000 years. A girl carrying makeup, showing a piece of hair, or fluttering her lashes at the incorrect night, could effortlessly find herself accused of being everything from immoral to outright demonic. A few even believed that beauty may be an phantasm, a sorceress's disguise, a glamour conjured by means of witches to guide righteous men off track. This can sound dramatic, but recollect, this became a time whilst terrible climate could get you burned at the stake. Conversely, individuals who were plain or unwell featured have been sometimes assumed to be morally deficient or just unlucky. The concept that outward appearance reflected in a man or woman wasn't just famous. It became doctrine in a few circles. Splendor intended grace. Ugliness supposed punishment, contamination, or divine disappointment. Of root, all of this made things spectacularly difficult. Be beautiful, however, don't strive too tough. Glow with virtue, but no longer so much that it looks as if satisfaction, and peculiarly, in no way look greater appealing than the neighborhood lord's spouse. That changed into a one-way price tag, to a silent convent, or an surprisingly convenient contamination. So, in the long run, medieval splendor requirements weren't just about aesthetics. They were a complete blown ethical tightrope, balancing conceitedness, virtue, and whatever powdered lead turned into left in your makeup kit. The Persian immortals were extra than just elite troops. They were an assertion, a living image of imperial power, precision, and unyielding continuity. Their origins hint again to the very delivery of the Achaemenid Empire, underneath Cyrus the Exquisite in the 6th century B.C. At a time while Persia became unexpectedly remodeling from a regional electricity right into a sprawling imperial juggernaut, Cyrus understood something essential. An empire needs a spine, not simply administrators and governors. However, an elite force that could task dominance, inspire loyalty, and suppress rebel with equal performance. Accordingly, the Immortals had been born. The call Immortals wasn't just a piece of royal flair. It became a logistical and mental masterpiece. According to Herodotus, their power become usually kept exactly at 10,000 men. If one guy died, fell ill, or become wounded, he turned into immediately changed. The numbers never wavered. From the outside, it regarded they couldn't be diminished, couldn't be weakened, and peculiarly couldn't die. Whether delusion or clever bookkeeping, the image caught and the call persevered. Immortality, in this situation, wasn't approximately character survival. It turned into about the eternal presence of Persian might. These guys were not random conscripts. To be an immortal meant being decided on from a few of the Persian nobility, or at least from households of excessive status and demonstrated loyalty. Training started out younger. Area was brutal. Loyalty to the king unquestionable. They had been anticipated to be not just warriors, but exemplars of useful resource values, order, obedience, and composure beneath stress. They were also richly dressed, gowns of great substances, scale armor beneath their garments, and frequently armed with a spear, bow, short sword, and a wicker defend. Their appearance become as calculated as their procedures. Persian kings were not just sending warriors into conflict. They have been sending a mobile political message, wrapped in silk and metallic. From the plains of Lydia to the deserts of Egypt, anywhere the Persian Empire improved, the Immortals followed. They stood behind kings, beside thrones, and on the front of the battlefield. In case you saw them approaching, you didn't just see soldiers. You noticed the unbroken heartbeat of the empire. Immortals didn't blink. Immortals did not retreat. Immortals persevered. And that's precisely what made them terrifying. The appearance of the Persian Immortals changed into no accident. It became mental conflict. These men were not covered head to toe in gleaming bronze like Greek hoplites. No, the Immortals looked otherworldly, like a wave of richly dressed shadows sweeping throughout the land. Their uniforms blended regal flair with army function. They wore elaborately embroidered tunics and trousers, regularly dyed in rich reds and purples, colors of the aristocracy and command. Below those lay a layer of scale armor fabricated from bronze or iron, flexible sufficient for movement, however lethal in close fight. Their shields have been crafted from woven wicker, deceptively mild, yet able to deflect arrows and soak up blows. Their maximum one-of-a-kind detail, however, changed into their headdress, a smooth felt cap known as a tiara, on occasion pulled over the face to obscure identification. Unlike the Greeks who glorified individuality in armor and valor, the Immortals thrived in uniformity. 10,000 men moving in close to silence, all in addition armed and armored, created a visual spectacle that crushed the senses. It became like looking a curtain of death descend at the battlefield. Every Immortal carried a quick spear, a bow with a quiver of arrows, and a short sword or a belt. But possibly most extraordinary became their ability to move quick and remain deadly in almost any terrain. Their schooling emphasized agility and persistence over brute power. They could march across complete provinces without breaking formation. And not like many historical forces, the immortals were similarly cozy, fighting in open conflict or serving as imperial guards in royal courts. Their system turned into mild enough to ensure quick deployment, but amazing enough to intimidate and destroy. It wasn't about brute pressure. It was approximately consistency. Approximately never failing, by no means impressive, and never seeming prone. And that consistency, mixed with the mystery in their look, helped forge their legend. Once they marched into struggle, drums would pound and dust could upward thrust in the back of them, but their expressions remained eerily composed. No roaring, no boasting, just eerie synchronized precision. It turned into as though they had been now not men, however machines crafted now not in flesh, however in subject, ritual and fear. To face the immortals wasn't truly to face dying. It became to face a concept that some armies did not simply fight. They endured without pause or pity. To be an immortal became no longer just a job. It became a lifelong identification, a standing image, and in some methods a sentence. Whilst they were respected and richly rewarded, the expectancies have been massive. These guys lived underneath regular scrutiny. Their meals, clothing, and housing were all furnished by means of the nation, but not out of kindness. It was to ensure absolute manipulate. From the moment they entered the ranks, they belonged now not to their families, but to the empire. Maximum immortals got here from Persian, Median, or Elamite the aristocracy. However, lower-ranking sons of unswerving households could upward thrust into the ranks if they showed extremely good subject. Schooling started out in childhood, often within militaremies connected to the royal court docket. Boys learned archery on horseback, how to endure pain and hunger, how to march in step, and most importantly, the way to obey without hesitation. There has been no room for glory-seeking or private ambition. An immortal who stood out an excessive amount of was corrected. The formation turned into sacred. Cohesion got here notably. Area dominated each corner of their lives. They accompanied a strict daily routine. Wake before sunrise, drill in silence, keep weapons and armor. Meals were eaten communally, always modest, continually nutritionally calculated for persistence. Meat, flatbread, dates, and wine have been staples. However, luxuries were discouraged. The empire needed warriors, no longer pampered aristocrats. When not on campaign, the immortals served as guards for the king and his court docket. But even then, their obligations have been greater than ceremonial. They stood look ahead to assassination tries, monitored nobles for disloyalty, and maintained order within the most volatile locations of the empire. Their mere presence should silence dissent in a royal corridor. They were the eyes and ears of the Achaemenid ruler, skilled to detect lies, sense worry, and act decisively. Interestingly, they weren't totally reduced off from circle of relatives' lifestyles. Immortals were allowed to marry and maintain families. However, they can be summoned at a second's note. When duty referred to as, "They left the whole lot behind, no questions requested." A man who hesitated even as soon as will be quietly replaced. In any case, the wide variety usually needed to remain at 10,000. No gaps, no delays. It became this bloodless green system that ensured their mythos. They did not simply combat with subject. They lived in field. They were tools of empire, honed, polished, and sharpened till nothing remained but obligation. If Cyrus the High Quality created the immortals, it became Darius the Extraordinary who perfected them. While Darius rose to strength in 522 BCE, amid palace intrigue and assassination, the immortals were the tool he used to legitimize and stabilize his reign. They were no longer just a private guard. They were an extension of royal authority, woven at once into the fabric of his increasing imperial paperwork. Darius understood that power failed to only rest on navy energy, however, at the illusion of order and inevitability. And nothing projected that image greater successfully than the immortals. He paraded them at festivals, had them stationed prominently round his new capital of Pipiles, and dispatched them on excessive profile missions. They had been constantly visible, always composed, constantly the identical. 10,000 everlasting faces of Persian dominance. But Darius also reshaped their tactical position. Underneath his management, the immortals have become a middle element of Persian blended palms conflict. Now not just elite infantry, they were regularly deployed along archers, cavalry, and chariotry in coordinated moves. Darius located vast fee on strategic flexibility, and the immortals had to adapt. They trained extra rigorously in ranged fight, siege warfare, and battlefield coordination. Reports from later Greek observers describe how they moved with terrifying efficiency, firing arrows in volleys even as slowly advancing behind their wicker shields, in no way breaking formation. They also have become heavily worried in suppressing rebellions. Darius's empire stretched from Egypt to the Indus Valley, and revolts had been common. The immortals had been often the primary wave of retaliation in Elilim, Babylon, and Sia. They acted as each punishment and message. The empire is looking, and the king's will is inexhaustible. It became beneath Darius that they earned a darker reputation. Not simply elite warriors, however, gadgets of fear and retribution. Even their iconography was multiplied. Carvings at Pepilales display them in best strains, stylized and same, going through eternity in stone. These weren't mere portraits. They were propaganda. Darius wanted every challenge and traveler to understand. Those guys are constantly here, continually armed, and that they do not die. Step out of line, and you'll meet 1 or 10,000. Through Darius, the immortals became extra than an army unit. They were institutionalized worry woven into the royal photograph, deployed with surgical precision, and wrapped in gold-threaded silence. The Persian immortals reached the peak in their legend in the course of the reign of Xerxes the Excellent, and nowhere become their popularity greater fiercely examined than at the narrow mountain bypass of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. This struggle, now mythologized through centuries of art and cinema, wasn't only a conflict of armies. It became a symbolic collision between two significantly one-of-a-kind worldviews. Persian imperial order as opposed to Greek city-state defiance. And on the center of the typhoon stood the immortals. Whilst Xerxes invaded Greece with what historical assets claimed turned into the largest military the world had ever seen, he delivered the immortals as his personal vanguard. They didn't just shield him. They were a scalpel inside the heart of chaos. Their popularity alone preceded them. The Greeks had heard of the 10,000 who by no means died, the elite troops who served kings like gods and fought with faultless precision. At Thermopylae, they met resistance that rattled their mythos. King Leonidas and his few thousand Greeks, maximum famously 300 Spartans, held the narrow bypass against wave after wave of Persian assaults. On the second day of war, Xerxes ordered the immortals to interrupt the Greek line. It turned into meant to be a crushing blow. In any case, these were the elite of the elite. However, what accompanied was not the instantaneous path Xerxes anticipated. The immortals, professional as they had been, have been limited by using the tight geography of the pass. Their bows were almost vain in such confined space, and their shorter spears could not reach beyond the long dory of the Greek hoplites. For hours they clashed with disciplined Spartans who fought in tight interlocking phalanxes, trained from adolescence for exactly this kind of fight. The immortals suffered losses, heavy ones. Herodotus referred to, possibly with a few glee, that they had been no greater successful than the normal troops. It wasn't only a navy defeat. It became a rupture in their photograph. The immortals had always appeared untouchable, gods of battle in silk and scale. However, at Thermop they bled. They died. And for the first time, the phantasm of their immortality cracked beneath the weight of Spartan spears and Greek defiance. But even in defeat, they remained terrifying. They adapted. They regrouped. And that they marched once more. Immortality, in the end, wasn't about invincibility. It was about staying power. The most fascinating part of the Persian immortals wasn't simply their schooling or battlefield procedures. It was their gadget. What absolutely made them immortal wasn't magic or divine favor. It became management. Cold, green, relentless forms. When one immortal fell, whether in conflict due to infection or via retirement, some other took his vicinity right away. No mourning, no rite, just a seamless substitution. The overall variety continually remained exactly 10,000. This wasn't a poetic exaggeration. It became with the aid of design. The Achaemenid Empire ran on logistics, and the Immortals have been the top instance. They had a constantly maintained pool of trainees and understudies, younger guys being groomed to fill vacancies the moment they seemed. Those replacements have been kept inside the capital, supervised, drilled, and rotated via lesser obligations till called up. This internal structure made the Immortals a long way greater than a static elite unit. They had been a dwelling device of excellence, always regenerating, usually evolving. To facilitate this, information were stored with meticulous care. Officers referred to as Hazaripades, literally commander of 1,000, oversaw recruitment, discipline, and supply. There were 10 such commanders underneath the overall leader of the Immortals. Beneath them, an internet of subcommanders, scribes, and area masters ensured each guy had the suitable fingers, rations, lodging, and medical support. Lose a person in Egypt. A substitute is dispatched from Swa. A soldier breaks a leg in the course of patrol in Media. His successor is already packing his tools. This equipment extended beyond just Navy readiness. It changed into psychological. The illusion of 10,000 unchanging warriors became a tool of imperial terror. In case you killed one, some other right away stepped into his location. It did not matter who they have been, in my opinion. The identity became beside the point. The presence turned into eternal. Like a hydra of discipline and silk, the Immortals created the phantasm of unstoppable force because the system by no means paused to grieve. Even off the battlefield, this device functioned perfectly. If an Immortal's circle of relatives became disloyal or politically compromised, he was quietly removed and replaced. No scandal, no drama. The line moved forward as if nothing had changed. This mechanism, so alien in comparison to the dignity in search of Greek ethos, changed into possibly the Immortals' greatest energy, not ability, no longer braveness, but the cold truth that they might in no way surely disappear. While the Persian Immortals are remembered as warriors, they were also something far subtler, diplomats in armor. In the Achaemenid worldview, military force wasn't just about conquest. It was approximately presence. And the Immortals have been often deployed now not just to fight, but to be seen, to enter overseas courts as reciting representations of Persian elegance and strength. Their silken gowns, gilded guns, and best subject made them terrifying in war, but enthralling in peace. Whilst ambassadors arrived in foreign lands, the Immortals frequently followed them, now not for protection, however as spectacle. Believe a small elite escort getting into a Greek or Babylonian town. 10 guys flawlessly synchronized, dressed not in difficult leather-based or blood-stained bronze, but in satisfactory tunics laced with gold, silent and unreadable behind their soft felt headdresses. They did not shout or threaten. They failed to need to. Their very existence was a negotiation. In satrapies' provinces, Immortals had been often stationed to remind local governors where true electricity resided. They rarely interfered with civil rule, however they had been usually there looking. A whisper of sedition should carry a squad of them to a governor's door. Riot within the provinces became regularly stopped before it began without a doubt, because the opportunity dealing with the immortals become too dreadful to do not forget. Even within the royal court, their presence changed into multifunctional. They acted as ceremonial guards in the course of Norse festivals, coronations, and diplomatic receptions. But behind the scenes, they monitored courtiers, sniffed out treason, and enforced the king's will with silent performance. A few historians argue they acted almost like an inner intelligence corporation, an ever-present caution that loyalty changed into not non-obligatory. This dual identification, warrior and envoy, enforcer and decoration, changed into part of their genius. Unlike maximum elite units of historical times who lived for the honor of war on my own, the immortals served a miles broader imperial approach. Battle changed into just one tool. Theirs turned into an empire held collectively, now not just by using swords, however by symbols. The immortals understood that worry and awe are siblings. In overseas courts and far-off palaces, their arrival sent a clear message. The king is watching. The empire is everlasting. And resistance isn't worth the fee. And in this manner, they fought wars without ever unshathing a blade. All empires age, and so do their legends. By way of the later years of the Amanid Empire, the immortals had been nonetheless feared, still reputable, but now not invincible. The machinery that had once made them immortal began to rust, no longer with a dramatic disintegrate, however with sluggish, creeping inefficiency. As Persian kings grew increasingly more detached from the battlefield, more involved with courtly luxurious and intrigue, the immortals too started out to shift. From hardened warriors into royal adorns underneath kings like Artaxerxes and Darius III, the elite guard nevertheless existed, still dressed the component, nevertheless marched in perfect formation. But cracks had fashioned. Recruitment standards slipped. Political favoritism began to seep into their ranks. Wherein once best the most disciplined and dependable guys have been selected, now nobles pulled strings to vicinity unworthy sons into the sacred 10,000. The end result become diffused however fatal. Uniformity without spirit, field without coronary heart. This decay have become tragically apparent, while Alexander the Top-Notch released his invasion of Persia in 334 BCE. On the War of Galgamla in 331 BCE, the immortals have been deployed along the Persian center to shield Darius III. And despite the fact that they fought with courage, they could not maintain against the tactical brilliance and ruthless momentum of Alexander's Macedonian phalanx. They had been outflanked, outmaneuvered, and beaten. Worse, but the myth did not live to tell the tale the conflict. For centuries, the call immortals had stimulated awe. But Galgamla proved they were not what they have been below Cyrus. the exceptional or Xerxes I. The machinery of immediate substitute faltered. The backup system that, when made their losses invisible, absolutely wasn't in location anymore. The unit in no way recovered. While Alexander marched into Peplua and took the royal palace, he walked into a shell of an empire. The immortals weren't there to protect it. The unbroken line had finally been damaged. But their tale did not stop with defeat. Factors of the immortals lived on. Alexander co-opted Persian traditions into his army. Later, inside the Sasanian Empire, a new elite pressure could upward push, occasionally even referred to as immortals once more by using historians. Even though not direct descendants, they echoed the original myth. 10,000 sturdy, elite, fearsome, everlasting. Even of their fall, the immortals left a blueprint. They had proven the arena a way to construct now not just in military, however a legend. The Persian immortals may additionally have vanished from the battlefield, however their affect by no means disappeared. Lengthy after the fall of the Achaemenid Empire, the concept of an unbreakable elite fighting pressure remained lodged inside the creativeness of generals, kings, and storytellers alike. Their legend continued no longer because they won each battle, however, due to the fact they represented something larger. The perfection of country-controlled power. And military that failed to age, failed to question, and did not falter. Whilst the Greeks described them, it became with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Herodotus called them immortals, not because they couldn't be killed, but due to the fact they could not be visible to die. Their replacements were instant, their presence everlasting. To the Greeks this became eerie, almost unnatural. They were used to war as a chaotic, non-public affair. The immortals had been something else, specific, faceless, disciplined to the brink of humanity. In Roman instances, students still reference the immortals whilst talking of historical strength. Even Byzantine historians noted the shape of the Persian elite protect as something to be sought after. And in the early Islamic duration, Arab historians acknowledged stories of the 10,000 who had once guarded kings of vintage, their spears glinting like a forest of silver beneath the wasteland sun. The concept could be revived again in the Sasanian Empire, wherein an elite cavalry corps, once in a while noted by using historians as the brand new immortals, served as the empire's armored fist. Although no longer without delay descended from the Achaemenid unit, they carried the equal challenge, embodying imperial invincibility. Even Napoleon Bonaparte centuries later studied Persian military organization and praised their structure. Culturally, the immortals seeped into fantasy. Present-day media often misrepresents them, turning them into monsters, demons, or masked assassins. But the fact was some distance greater compelling. They were human. Terrifyingly human. Everyday men become gadgets of empire through relentless schooling, mental control, and a deeply embedded device of continuity. They failed to want magic to become legendary, simply consistency and silence. Their finest weapon wasn't their sword. It became the concept that they had been continually coming, an everlasting shadow at the horizon. And so the immortals stay on in stone carvings, in battle doctrines, and in the whispered fears of those who realize that energy, whilst properly organized and without end replaced, can become something very near immortality. Earlier than there have been legends of Greek Amazon, there had been the Scythians, nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppe, feared and revered from the Black Sea to the Alai Mountains. Not like maximum historic societies, Scythian ladies did not live in the back of the tents weaving fabric or elevating kids. They rode horses, wielded bows, and went to conflict. And they didn't just accompany guys into warfare. They led and fought with lethal ability. Those were no longer exceptions. This became the tradition. Greek historians like Herodotus have been stunned once they encountered those ladies. He described entire tribes wherein ladies refused to marry, except that they had first killed an enemy in fight. His phrases, in the beginning supposed as exclusive curiosities, have given that located archaeological evidence. Burial mounds called Kyrens scattered throughout Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia have yielded marvelous finds. The skeletons of younger ladies buried with bows, arrows, swords, and even battle-inflicted injuries. One such discovery discovered a girl with an arrowhead lodged in her spine, her frame armored, her grave richly supplied. These were not ceremonial guns. They have been used, and so had she. Scythian society became basically specific from its contemporaries. Life at the steppe demanded mobility and resilience. Each person, male or female, needed to ride, hunt, and shield the tribe. Ladies learned archery as young as boys did. They wore the identical leather trousers, the identical armor. They even wore their hair and tattoos in similar style, indistinguishable on horseback underneath a hurricane of arrows. This created a warrior subculture, wherein gender roles have been fluid at the battlefield, but strict off it. A Scythian female could be lethal at complete gallop, after which returned domestic to fulfill ritual and maternal obligations. The two roles had been no longer in warfare. They have been complementary. Greek myths of the Amazon may additionally were stimulated through exaggerated encounters with Scythian women. But even as the Amazon of delusion vanished into fantasy, the Scythians were real. They fought Persians, clashed with Greeks, and terrified the Macedonians. And for centuries they roamed the steppe with fireplace and fury, ladies and men alike. Inside the small West African country of Dahomey, contemporary-day Benin, and military of women as soon as struck worry into Eku colonizers, rival kingdoms, and every person foolish enough to underestimate them. They were called the Ayagi, but the French nicknamed them the Dahomey Amazon, contrast to the Greek myths. But those warriors had been very actual. With the aid of the 18th and 19th centuries, the Agagogi had grown to be the standing royal shield of Domi's king. But they were not just guards. They had been elite infantry skilled to kill, to protect, and to never retreat. Initially, they may have commenced as elephant hunters or palace attendants. However, over the years they developed right into a formal, feared military force. Recruited as young ladies, regularly selected for his or her electricity or spirit. The Agagogi had been separated from families and placed into intense schooling. Subject changed into general. They ran obstacle guides packed with thorns, sparred with real blades, and swore oaths of celibacy and absolute loyalty to the king. They wore braided sashes and carried muskets, machetes, and golf equipment. However, their deadliest weapon changed into psychological. European observers during the 19th century have been bowled over by means of their fearlessness and brutality. One French officer stated with unease how a Dahomey Amazon rushed forward, ripped open a person's throat, then calmly wiped her blade. These were no longer symbolic warriors. They have been frontline shock troops used in raids, battles, and ambushes. During the Franco-Dahomeyan Wars inside the 90s, the Agogi went toe-to-toe with French colonial troops. Outnumbered and outgunned, they nevertheless released nighttime raids, completed ambushes, and fought road with the aid of Avenue to guard their nation. Their tenacity pressured French commanders to rethink their approaches and their assumptions approximately gender in fight. However, it wasn't just their battlefield success that mattered. The Dahomey Amazon existed in a deeply patriarchal international, but they carved out an area of total autonomy and effect. They cautioned kings. They accomplished ceremonial responsibilities, and that they formed the kingdom's overseas coverage no longer from behind the scenes, however, with blades in hand. Though the French in the long run defeated Dahomey, the legend of the Agogi by no means died. In truth, their legacy helped inspire present-day fictional warriors like the Dora Milaje in Marvel's Black Panther. However, reality, as usually, is greater amazing than fiction. Within the shadowy pages of Japan's medieval records, one girl rides via blood and legend alike. Tomo Gozen, a samurai warrior of the past due 12th century. She fought at some point of the Genpei struggle, a brutal civil warfare among the Minamoto and Taira clans that gave birth to the primary shogunate. Tomoe wasn't a symbolic determine or a passive consort. She was a commander, a swordswoman, and an archer skilled within the lethal arts of the battlefield, and feared for her precision in fight. Her tale emerges maximum famously from the Hike Monogatari, a warfare epic that blends records with poetic flair. In it, Tom is defined as specifically stunning with white skin, long hair, and charming functions. But the subsequent sentence drops the actual thunder. She become additionally a remarkably robust archer, and as a swordswoman she changed into a warrior well worth 1,000. Beauty and lethality were not contradictions, they were fused. Tomoe served below Minamoto no Yashinaka, a warlord and her viable lover in the course of his campaign to capture manage of Kyoto. She wasn't a camp follower or a battlefield nurse. She changed into inside the thick of it, reportedly main troops, or even slaying a couple of enemies in unmarried combat. At the struggle of Owazu in 1184, going through encirclement via rival Minamoto forces, Yashinaka ordered his closing stand. Instead of flee, Tomoe selected to combat. In one in all her maximum famous encounters, she stated to have dismounted a charging enemy horseman, wrestled him to the floor, and beheaded him instantaneous. She then frivolously remounted and continued into the chaos. That second, probable adorned, probably authentic, has persisted for centuries as a symbol of her unequaled composure and talent. But what came about to Tomo after the battle remains a thriller. A few say she turned into captured and pressured into marriage. Others say she became a nun, taking flight into silence. Still others accept as true, with she vanished like a ghost again into the mists of legend. Regardless of the fact, the legacy of Tomo Gon survived in theater, folklore, and country-wide reminiscence. In a society built on inflexible gender roles and patriarchal manage, Tomo Gon stood aside, blade drawn, head excessive, and completely unafraid. She wasn't just fighting for her lord. She was combating for her proper to exist in a global that advised her she shouldn't. Inside the 1st century CE, the Roman Empire was at its height. Disciplined, prepared, and seemingly unstoppable. However then got here Boudica, a flame-haired Celtic queen from Britannia, who almost added the Roman system to its knees. Her call could echo through history as an image of raw vengeance, countrywide satisfaction, and the terrifying force of a female with not anything left to lose. Boudica turned into the spouse of Prasutagus, king of the Aini tribe in what's now eastern England. He changed into a client king beneath Rome, a puppet ruler allowed to keep energy as long as he saved the peace. However, when Prasutagus died, Rome overlooked his will and moved to seize his lands outright. In the process, Roman officials FG'd Boudica publicly and in line with Tacitus, raped her daughters. It turned into a brutal humiliation designed to overwhelm revolt. As a substitute, it lit a wildfire. In 60 or 61 CE, Boudica united numerous British tribes and launched one of the most ferocious revolts in Roman records. And she or he wasn't a figurehead. Roman deaths describe her leading her army from a chariot, spear in hand, wearing a flowing tunic and a large gold torque around her neck. Her fiery hair streamed at the back of her as she rode, calling her people to war. She turned into component priestess, element widespread and all fury. Her forces descended on Camelum, present-day Colchester, burning it to the ground. Subsequent came Londinium, the seed of modern London, in which she slaughtered Roman colonists and razed the town. Historians estimate over 70,000 Romans and sympathizers were killed in only a few months. Her military left a trail of ash and shattered conceitedness in the back of them. But the Romans underneath Governor Fuel Suetonius Paulinus regrouped. Notwithstanding being hugely outnumbered, they lured Boudica right into a pitched war wherein Roman discipline and formation tactics proved decisive. The rebellion became beaten. Boudica, facing defeat, is stated to have taken poison as opposed to be captured. Although her uprising failed, Boudica's legacy most effective grew. Roman historians painted her as a barbarian, and but one whose courage and management were not possible to ignore. For the British, specifically in later centuries, she became a symbol of resistance in opposition to tyranny, each foreign and domestic. In the war-ravaged steppes of primary Asia at some point of the golden age of Mongol growth, there emerged a female who terrified warriors and embarrassed princes, no longer with a sword, but with sheer bodily dominance. Her call became Kowtooloon, and he or she was the amazing, fantastic granddaughter of none apart from Genghis Khan. However, she did not just experience in his shadow. She carved out a legend of her personal, one headlock at a time. Born round 1260 CE, Kowtooloon was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, an effective cousin of Kublai Khan, and a rival claimant to leadership inside the Mongol Empire. Kowtooloon became raised like a warrior prince, skilled in archery, horse riding, and battlefield procedures. However, she stood out most for her skills in wrestling, a deeply respected and highly aggressive recreation a number of the Mongols. In step with the Persian historian Rashid Alan, Kowtooloon vowed she would most effective marry a man who ought to beat her in a wrestling suit. Many tried, all failed. Dozens of suitors walked away defeated and humiliated, some even wagering horses, gold, or herds on their probabilities. It said she accrued 10,000 horses from her victories, turning her into no longer only a champion, however one of the wealthiest ladies on the steppe. However, Kowtooloon wasn't simply tossing men onto the dust for amusing. She fought alongside her father in actual battles, commanding troops and breaking enemy strains. All through campaigns against both rival Mongol factions and Chinese forces, Kowtooloon was Kaidu's maximum trusted military advisor. He even considered naming her as his successor, an unheard of move in a lifestyle ruled by male warlords. This unsurprisingly sparked backlash. Some Mongol nobles whispered that her influence became unnatural, her electricity too threatening. Ultimately, Kaidu failed to make her his heir, deciding on a male family member as an alternative. But her recognition continued. Even Marco Polo, who traveled through the Mongol Empire, wrote of a Mongol princess who fought like a tiger and will trip and shoot as well as any guy. Later, histories tried to romanticize or decrease her, turning her right into a love-struck determine or decreasing her tale to legend. But make no mistake, Kowtooloon turned into real and her energy became legendary. She proved that within the heart of the maximum male-dominated empire on Earth, a girl may want a still upward push, not due to the fact she became allowed to, but due to the fact nobody should prevent her. In a time when women could not vote, very own land freely, or even wear guises clothing without risking arrest, one French teen not best wore armor, she led armies. Janavar, born in 1412 in a tiny village called Domi, become an illiterate peasant female. But by way of the age of 17, she could command troops, confront kings, and bend the course of the 100 Years' struggle between France and England. Her upward push wasn't born from Navy training or noble lineage. Joan claimed divine proposal. She said she heard voices, the ones of saints like Michael, Catherine, and Margaret, who informed her that she had been chosen to force the English from France and crown Charles the Dauphin as king. It changed into a wild declare, one that must are becoming her brushed off as mad. As an alternative, it were given her an audience with the destiny King Charles IX. The court docket tested her. Clergy grilled her for weeks, however by hook or by crook she acceded. They saw something in her. Conviction, charisma, something unexplainable. And so, clad in white armor, her banner flying excessive, Joan was dispatched to Orleans, a besieged town that symbolized the warfare's turning factor. French commanders were skeptical. However, Joan's mere presence revitalized their spirit. She did not just stand at the sidelines. She led fees, braved arrows, and rallied troops underneath fireplace. Towards all odds, the French lifted the siege. The victory electrified the country. Joan became called the Maid of Orleans, an image of divine want and patriotic resistance. After a string of victories, she escorted Charles to Rheims, wherein he became topped king, simply because the voices had foretold. However, power, reputation, and miracles include enemies. In 1430, she became captured via Burgundian allies of the English. Tried via a seasoned English ecclesiastical court docket, Joan was accused of heresy, witchcraft, and considerably sporting male garb, a crime punishable via dying. She became just 19 when they burned her alive in Rouen marketplace. However, her loss of life only magnified her legend. Years later, the Church reversed her conviction. Centuries later, she was canonized as a saint. By the time Nakano Tiko took up her naginata, a bladed pole arm favored with the aid of samurai women, Japan become converting speedy. It become the overdue 1860s, and the samurai class was being dismantled as the us of a modernized. But in a single final stand for the antique ways, this younger woman would write herself into records as the remaining proper Anugata, girl warrior of the samurai culture. Nano turned into born in 1847, right into a respected family of scholars and warriors. From a young age, she studied Confucian classics, calligraphy, and most significantly, martial arts. Her favorite weapon, the naginata, turned into extra than simply realistic. It turned into symbolic, historically utilized by girls of the samurai magnificence. It allowed for extended reach and sleek, fluid fight. Beneath the steerage of her adoptive father and martial arts master, she skilled till her ability rivaled that of the satisfactory guys in her domain. By means of her 20s, Nano had become each an educator and a warrior, coaching different women the methods of the sword. However, in 1868, Whilst the Boshin War broke out, a civil war between the imperial forces and the old Tokugawa shogunate, Nano didn't stay in the back of. She joined the defense of Aizu, one of the last bastions of conventional samurai resistance. Ladies have been not officially allowed to serve. However, Nano shaped an unofficial unit of lady fighters referred to as the Josh Tai, the ladies' military. Clad in hakama pants and traditional armor, those ladies fought fiercely along the men, protective their families, their metropolis, and their way of life. At the warfare of Aizu, Nano led her unit in hand-to-hand fight towards imperial troops armed with rifles. In line with witnesses, she killed several enemies before being shot in the chest. Understanding she become mortally wounded and unwilling to be captured or defiled, she asked her sister to behead her. Her body become buried at a temple in Fukushima, her sword beside her. Nano's bravery become mythical, even in defeat. These days, statues of her stand in Japan, mainly in Aizu, in which she's remembered not best as a warrior, however as a female who refused to bow to modernity, to patriarchy, or to death itself. Inside the smoldering ruins of worldwide battle II, one call sent shivers down the spines of German soldiers on the front. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, nicknamed Woman Dying by Her Enemies. She wasn't a fantasy, a morale booster, or a propaganda determinant. She was the actual component. A Soviet sniper who tallied 309 confirmed kills, together with 36 enemy snipers. She changed into the most deadly female sniper in recorded history. Born in 1916 in what is now Ukraine, Pavlichenko was aggressive from a young age. She was fiercely patriotic and a natural marksman. Whilst Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, she changed into simply 24 years old and studying history at university. But instead of books, she picked up a rifle and volunteered for the Pink Military. Officials to start with counseled she become a nurse. She refused. She desired a fight function, and she or he were given one. Deployed to the front lines at some point of the siege of Odessa, and later the siege of Sevastopol, Pavlichenko earned her recognition the hard way. She spent lengthy hours motionless, camouflaged in freezing terrain, watching for the precise shot. Her goals weren't simply foot infantrymen. She hunted officials, machine gunners, and rival snipers. She operated with nerves of metallic, staying power bordering on supernatural, and an absolute hatred for the invaders. Her kill relay climbed so high she turned into pulled from the front and sent on a diplomatic tour of the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. There she met President Franklin D. Roosevelt and formed a friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who well liked her composure and intellect. Pavlichenko gave speeches urging the Allies to open a 2D front in Europe, and mocking newshounds who asked her sexist questions about makeup and skirt length. After the conflict, she didn't retreat into obscurity. She earned her degree, became a historian, and skilled future generations of Soviet snipers. Even though she suffered from struggle-related trauma and injuries, her legacy persisted. She acquired the Hero of the Soviet Union medal and stays a national hero in both Russia and Ukraine. In an international that frequently doubts the place of women in warfare, Lyudmila Pavlichenko didn't argue. She failed to protest. She simply did the job higher than nearly all people who ever lived. For each well-known call Budaka, Tom, Gozin, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, there are infinite others whose testimonies have slipped through the cracks of mainstream records. Records, in spite of everything, became in large part written with the aid of men. And whilst ladies picked up swords, rifles, or spears, they have been frequently left out, downplayed, or became fantasy. But make no mistake, warrior girls have been there all alongside across continents, throughout centuries, and their silence become not voluntary. Recollect the Trung sisters of Vietnam, Trung Trac and Trungi, who led an insurrection in opposition to Chinese language profession inside the 1st century CE. They rode elephants into war, rallied hundreds of fans, and dominated an impartial kingdom for 3 years before being crushed by way of superior Chinese language forces. Their resistance remains commemorated nowadays with temples and galas in their honor, even though global records books hardly ever point out them, or the Ya Asantewar of the Ashanti Empire in West Africa, who in 1900 led an insurrection in opposition to British colonial forces. As Queen Mother, she rallied her humans whilst the British demanded the sacred golden stool, the symbol of Ashanti sovereignty. She introduced fiery speeches and led her troops in battle, showing that leadership and defiance knew no gender. There have been Viking guard maidens, likely not as common as legend suggests, however very Lot's gift. Archaeological unearths verify that girls had been buried with weapons, armor, or even battle horses, now not as ceremonial tokens, however as warriors. There were Apache ladies fighters within the American Southwest like Lawson, a non-secular warrior who rode and fought beside her brother, the well-known leader Victoria. In each era, in every location, warrior girls fought, now not usually to overcome, however to protect, to defend their households, their cultures, their houses. A few led armies, others fought as lone figures in resistance movements. A few have been queens, some have been peasants. But all shattered the lie that struggle belonged to guys on my own. Nowadays, their legacy is being reclaimed. From scholarly research to pop culture representations, the tales of these women are in the end resurfacing. And each rediscovered name is a reminder. History isn't simply what became written. It is also what became erased. Those ladies failed to ask to be remembered. They requested to be respected. And slowly, the sector is starting to listen. In the coronary heart of historic Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, song wasn't simply entertainment. It changed into ritual, strength, and language. And no instrument embodied this more than the lyre. A number of the International's earliest stringed devices, The Mesopotamian lyre dates lower back over 4,500 years, rising from the Sumerian town of In, which track became woven into both temple ceremony and royal court docket existence. The lyres of were not easy harps carved from timber. They were difficult, fantastically crafted items, frequently embellished with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and designated animal motifs. One of the maximum famous examples is the bull-headed lyre, discovered in a royal tomb inside the 1920s through Sir Leonard Woolley. Its soundbox became shaped like a bull's frame, and the instrument's head changed into included in gold leaf, its beard product of lapis. But this wasn't just for show. The bull turned into a symbol of power, and its presence on a lyre may also have been religious, no longer decorative. Played with the palms or a small pleroma, the lyre produced a resonant, haunting tone. Though we cannot hear historic melodies exactly as they have been, pupils accept as true with the Sumerians used a heptonic scale, 7 notes, much like modern Western track. Clay tablets inscribed with early musical notation offer tantalizing clues, displaying that music idea and scale creation existed even then. Those lyres weren't restricted to palace halls. In temples, song accompanied services and prayers to the gods. Hymns were sung with lyre accompaniment in honor of deities like Inanna and Enlil, turning song right into a sacred bridge among human and divine. In funerary rites, lyres mourn the lifeless, supporting guide souls into the afterlife. They weren't simply units. They were voices of transition and transformation. Mesopotamian musicians held a respected position in society. Some have been girl priestesses, others have been courtroom performers. They memorized complex songs handed down orally, often studying from a younger age within established colleges for scribes and musicians. These days, replicas of those ancient lyres are played in museums and reconstructions. Their smooth, twanging echoes reminding us that long earlier than Mozart, earlier than medieval minstrels, or maybe Homer's sung epics, human beings were plucking strings inside the barren region, chasing splendor and sound. Whilst the lyre sang lightly to the gods, the owos screamed, wept, and danced via the hearts of the ancient Greeks. This reed-blown double-piped wind instrument changed into no gentle flute. It was wild, emotional, and unrelenting. To the Greeks, song wasn't just entertainment. It was ethos, a pressure that formed the soul. And the aloes embodied its maximum primal aspect. In contrast to the lyre, which symbolized concord and order desired by using Apollo, the aloes was associated with Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and insanity. It became often performed at some point of rituals, dramatic performances, and army marches, giving it various emotional and functional makes use of. It consisted of pipes, usually made of timber, bone, or ivory, every with its very own reed and fingering holes. The musician or it performed both pipes concurrently, generating a dense, penetrating sound closer to a bagpipe than a contemporary flute. This required extremely good breath management. Musicians frequently used a way known as round breathing, breathing in through the nose while pushing air out via the cheeks, permitting them to play continuously. The effort warped their faces and puffed their cheeks a lot in order that athletes once in a while mocked all it gamers for their awkward appearance. But no matter the jokes, all it gamers have been reputable, even respected in certain circles. The alas changed into no longer for calm historical past song. It stirred the blood in ancient Greek theater. It followed tragedies and comedies, adding mood and momentum to performances via Sophocles and Euripides. In war, it saved hoplites marching in step, its blaring voice cutting through the chaos. And throughout Bacchic rituals, it driven dancers into trance-like states, dissolving the line between performer and possessed. Plato had a complicated relationship with the Owos in his Republic. He famously brushed off it as too emotionally overwhelming, who prefer instruments like the lyre and cathara for his or her highbrow clarity. Yet even he couldn't deny its energy. The Owos could simulate sorrow, mimic fury, or stir euphoria, every now and then all within the equal breath. Nowadays, fragments of historic alloy live on in museums, and current reconstructions hint at its raw energy. Unlike the mathematically balanced lyre, the aloes wasn't about perfection. It became about launch. It carried the sound of frenzy, mourning, seduction, and warfare. Inside the historical courts and scholar studios of China, track became more than art. It changed into philosophy in movement. And few devices encompass this extra than the gin and the gujiang, stringed zithers that carried the sounds of dynasties, meditation, and poetic introspection. They'll look comparable at a glance. However, each served an awesome function in shaping China's musical identity. The jin is the elder of the two, and tool with over 3,000 years of records. With 7 strings and a protracted fretless wood body, it produced quiet, diffuse tones. To the untrained ear, the guqin sounds almost whisper-like. Gentle slides, harmonics, and plucked notes that echo like raindrops on antique tile. But to Chinese language pupils and sages, these sounds meditated the balance among heaven and earth. Confucius himself was stated to play the gin, believing it cultivated ethical man or woman and inner concord. In historic China, getting to know to play the gine wasn't approximately becoming a performer. It was approximately turning into civilized. Contrast this with the gujiang, a more youthful, louder cousin with a brighter sound and greater public lifestyles. With 16 to 21 strings or more in present-day versions, the gujiang became constructed for performance. Its curved wood frame and movable bridges permit for wealthy melodies and dramatic glissandos. Musicians pluck the strings with pli connected to their hands, creating cascades of notes that shimmer like flowing water. It turned into preferred in palaces, folks' tune, or even navy camps. Wherein the gin whispered to the soul, the gujiang sang to the gang. Both contraptions had roles in ritual and storytelling. The gin often observed poetry readings, philosophical lectures, and meditation. The guzheng changed into used in banquets, operas, and to recount historical epics. Its song could mimic galloping horses, flowing rivers, or weeping fanatics, during vibrating silk strings and masterful fingerwork. These contraptions additionally represented gendered spaces in historical China. The gin become historically performed through male students, while the guzheng have become greater associated with lady performers, particularly in later dynasties. But both had been respected, taught in musicomies, and written into the Confucian ideals of balanced schooling. These days both gin and guzheng are nevertheless performed, revived in classical and contemporary settings alike. They continue to be dwelling echoes of China's historical soul, in which track was now not most effective heard, but felt as a course to distinctive feature and emotional depth. In historic Egypt, music wasn't historical past noise. It became a sacred device, a shape of divine verbal exchange that echoed through temples, tombs, and everyday lifestyles. From pharaohs to peasants, tune became anywhere. It soothed people, commemorated the useless, guided religious rituals, and entertained the reciting. And the instruments that fashioned this soundscape have been as numerous as the Nile itself. One of the oldest and most iconic Egyptian units changed into the harp. Early harps curved like bows evolved into larger angular harps that stood as tall as a person. Those gadgets had been plucked with the arms, often via temple musicians or court docket entertainers. Harps were not only for artwork. They had been associated with the afterlife. Tomb paintings frequently show harpists playing for the souls of the lifeless, easing their adventure into eternity. Then got here the serum, a sacred rattle associated with the goddess Hathor, protector of song, motherhood, and pleasure. Made of steel with unfastened crossbars, the serum produced a jangling sound when shaken. It wasn't subtle, however it changed into powerful. Utilized in temples to summon gods, purify areas, and pressure out evil spirits. The shaking of a serum become believed to please deities and preserve cosmic order. Flutes frequently crafted from reed or bone brought breathy melodies to processions and rituals. The double clarinet with pipes played concurrently created a rich humming concord, a predecessor of the owos of Greece. Percussion came via body drums, hand clappers, and even castanets, specifically in dances and festivals. Professional musicians in Egypt held respected positions. Many have been women depicted in artwork as harpists and singers, often serving temples. Those girls were more than entertainers. They have been chantresses of Ammon, musicians of Isis, figures of spiritual power. Music should honor gods, accompany services, and mark the transition between life and loss of life. Egyptian notation stays elusive. In contrast to Mesopotamia or Greece, few musical records continue to exist. But their contraptions depicted vividly in tombs and temples inform us enough. Ancient Egyptians understood music as shape, emotion, and magic. Even in death, music turned into essential. Devices had been buried with the elite, their owners believing they'd play once more inside the subject of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. To them, track wasn't a hobby. It turned into eternity's language. Lengthy before written phrases etched history into stone, historic African cultures used something far greater, primal and immediate. Rhythm. Throughout the continent, drums weren't just contraptions. They had been voices. They spoke, commanded, remembered, and summoned. In Africa's historic societies, music, mainly percussion, became a dwelling respiration language that carried testimonies, laws, identities, and the heartbeat of the divine. Drums numerous by way of location and reason. However, one of the maximum iconic turned into the speaking drum determined in West Africa. Shaped like an hourglass and strung with leather-based cords, this drum could mimic the tonal language of the people. Professional drummers should talk whole terms via adjusting anxiety on the chords, even as putting it with a curved stick. Messages have been dispatched across villages saying births, deaths, warnings, or royal summons. Long before the discovery of paper or the postal machine, the drum have become the continent's first wireless conversation device. But drums weren't simply sensible, they have been spiritual. In kingdoms like historic Kush and No, drums summoned ancestors and deities. In Efa and Benin, they venerated kings and gods in elaborate courtroom rituals. Drumming was relevant to initiation ceremonies, healing rituals, and funerals. It turned into stated that to beat a sacred drum turned into to evoke forces beyond the veil. African drums got here in infinite paperwork. Djembe, Dundun, Bugarabu, and Kedi, each with specific roles inside the musical hierarchy. They had been carved from single logs, cautiously hollowed and outfitted with animal hide, each tuned to a selected pitch or tone. The craftsmanship became sacred, exceeded down from father to son with rituals even in the course of the making of the instrument, and percussion failed to forestall at drums. Rattles, bells, shakers, and thumb pianos added layers of rhythm and melody, creating a complex polyrhythmic soundscape that Western music wouldn't fully apprehend till centuries later. In African way of life, song changed into inseparable from movement. You did not simply listen, you danced, breathed, sweated with it. The drummer wasn't a performer. He became a conduit channeling power, spirit, and communal reminiscence. Those rhythms traveled via the trans-Saharan trade, through the Nile, and later via the Atlantic slave exchange, shaping diasporic song from Brazil to the Caribbean. But their heart became always Africa, where the beat wasn't enjoyment. It turned into identification, ancestry, and survival. High within the Andean mountains, where the air thins and the clouds brush the earth, track floated via the stone cities and terrace fields, now not from string or drum, but from wind. Ancient Andean civilizations like the Nazca, Mach, and Inca evolved a wealthy musical lifestyle centered around aerophones, flutes, whistles, and most famously pan pipes or seku. The seku is a deceptively simple-looking device. a couple of reeds or bamboo tubes of various lengths lashed together in a row or stacked in double rows. Each tube plays one observe, and players trade rapidly among rows to create melodies. The end result is a haunting, breathy harmony that echoes across mountains like a communication with the wind itself. Siu ensembles were often performed in pairs, two players appearing alternating notes in interlocking styles, a technique referred to as hocketting, which symbolized the Andean perfect of duality and balance in nature and society. Flutes product of bone, clay, or reed had been also vast, some so small they could grasp from necklaces, others big sufficient to produce deep, resonant tones. Many had been carved inside the shapes of birds, snakes, or spirits, showing the religious hyperlink between sound and the natural world. Those weren't simply musical contraptions. They have been sacred equipment. Music changed into used to call rain, bless harvests, honor the sun, or communicate with ancestors. One mainly captivating locate is the ceramic whistling vessels of the Macau civilization. Whilst water changed into poured into them, inner chambers forced air through a whistle, producing eerie tones, literally musical pottery. These have been probably used in rituals, combining water, air, and sound into a single ceremonial act. In Inca society, song followed each stage of existence. From delivery celebrations to funerals, from army parades to agricultural festivals, there has been a melody for every second. Inca musicians performed for gods like Inai, the sun, and Pachamama, the earth, offering their breath as a form of non-secular devotion. Even soldiers marched with coordinated flute song, turning struggle into ritual choreography. Although Spanish colonization nearly erased many native traditions, the sound of Andean flutes in no way fully vanished. These days, their echoes can still be heard in Peruvian highlands and Bolivian villages. An ancient voice of stone, wind, and sky nonetheless singing in the thin air. In historic India, song became greater than a performance. It turned into cosmic engineering. According to Hindu philosophy, the universe itself became produced from sound, from the primordial vibration referred to as Om. From this belief grew one of the International's most tricky and enduring musical traditions rooted in ritual, arithmetic, and spiritual transformation. Early texts like the Vedas courting back to at the least 1500 CE already incorporate hymns referred to as Saman chants, which had been meant to be sung, not simply recited. These hymns shaped a part of sacred rituals with precise melodies designed to align the soul with divine forces. The priestly solid the Brahmins were trained, now not best in philosophy and fireplace offerings, but in voice modulation and musical cadence. Precision become essential. Mispronouncing a word may want to in concept corrupt the ritual. The earliest gadgets used in Vedic and post-Vedic India served each sonic and symbolic roles. The Vienna, a plucked string device with a resonating gourd, became a symbol of gaining knowledge of and divine expression. It became, and nonetheless, is associated with the goddess Saraswati, the deity of wisdom and the arts. Its strings have been stated to echo the vibrations of the cosmos, permitting the participant to connect with regularly occurring truths through melody. Wind instruments like the Bansuri bamboo flute were not best equipment of melody, but automobiles of myth. Lord Krishna, the god of affection and divine play, was often depicted gambling the flute, captivating humans and animals alike. The sound of the Bansuri changed into believed to pierce the illusions of fact Maya and shipping listeners to a higher kingdom of cognizance. Percussion additionally held substantial power. The middengam and taba weren't simply rhythm keepers. They reflected heartbeats, breath styles, and cosmic cycles. Rhythms or talas have been complex mathematical styles, a few cyclical, some asymmetrical, each connected to emotional states and times of day. Indian music become deeply tied to rasa idea, the notion that music need to evoke specific emotional flavors like love, heroism, serenity, or sorrow. Even in historical instances, ragas, melodic frameworks had been designed to stir the soul and manual meditation. Not like many historical traditions misplaced to time, India's musical roots have not most effective survived. They have got developed. However, at their core stays the same ancient notion that to make song is to touch the divine. In the ancient towns of Mesoamerica, from the towering pyramids of Teotihuacan to the ceremonial plazas of the Mir and Aztecs, track turned into inseparable from the sacred. It wasn't just artwork. It turned into electricity used to talk to gods, sanctify blood services, summon rain, and terrify enemies. For the peoples of Meso, the USA, song changed into ritual generation, an invisible thread linking humans to the divine and the lifeless. Drums ruled the soundscape. The maximum iconic changed into the huital, a tall, unmarried-headed drum carved from hollowed tree trunks and performed with bare arms. Protected in animal skins and decorated with glyphs or sacred pyx, the huital throbbed in the course of galas, battle, and sacrifices. Its deep, resonant sound echoed via stone courtyards, just like the heartbeat of the gods. Then came the tianesti, a slit drum manufactured from hollowed wood performed with rubber-tipped mallets. Its surface was carved into two tongues that produced exceptional pitches while struck. The tianesti wasn't simply percussive. It can talk. In Nahuatl, the Aztec language, it changed into said that tianesti should sing the names of deities or the rhythms of destiny itself. Wind units were also principal. Flutes made from bone, clay, and reed have been not unusual, frequently formed like animals or gods. A few were so intricately made that they may mimic bird calls, jaguar growls, or human screams. In reality, the infamous Aztec death whistle, shaped like a cranium and blown like a flute, produces a blood-chilling shriek, probably used throughout battle or sacrificial ceremonies to strike terror into enemies or open portals to the spirit international. Song followed every most important occasion: delivery, coming-of-age rites, war, agricultural cycles and demise. Musicians and dancers skilled in special schools, acting no longer only for crowds, but for the gods. Positive units have been reserved for nobles or priests. Gambling them, incorrectly, could be taken into consideration a spiritual offense. Even sacrifice, important to Aztec religion, was done to a musical score. Drums pounded, flutes wailed, and conch shells howled at the same time as hearts were supplied to the sun. The track failed to soothe. It activated. It guided souls, fed gods, and saved the cosmic engine turning. In Mesoamerica, track wasn't a backdrop. It became the rite. It wasn't intended to entertain. It changed into meant to transform. Although the civilizations of antiquity have risen and fallen, their tune has never honestly died. It lingers no longer usually in sound, however in ritual, layout, and cultural DNA. In many approaches, historic track turned into never supposed to be preserved in sheet tune or captured in recordings. It become exceeded via hands, mouths, and hearts. A dwelling tradition, encoded in reminiscence and performance. Take the Chinese language Gain or Indian Veena. Those are not museum portions. They're nonetheless performed today, often the usage of strategies which have been surpassed down for millennia. Performers don't simply mimic ancient sounds. They embody them. Each Be Aware contains centuries of philosophy, subculture, and meditation. In a single pluck, you may sense the same longing or pleasure that an emperor or sage as soon as felt. In Africa, the drums nevertheless talk. The rhythms of the gamber, the call and reaction of move, the syncopation of dance, all echo ancient practices that predate colonial maps or written records. Even within the Americas, the haunting breath of the Andean siku, or the thunder of powwow drums among indigenous tribes, reflects echoes of ancestral voices. Some devices are direct descendants, others are stimulated reinventions, however the roots are ancient. Even in modern Western song, historical concepts survive. The 7-observe heptonic scale, utilized in Mesopotamia, laid a basis for contemporary harmony. Greek track principle, modes, intervals, ethos fed into early Christian chant, and the eventual start of classical song and the instruments. The lyre became the lute which birthed the guitar. The olos's double reed design stimulated the oboe and bassoon. However, perhaps the most enduring legacy is the purpose of ancient tune. It wasn't meant to promote tickets or pinnacle charts. It changed into ritual. It was restoration. It marked beginning and death, stitching and harvest, love and warfare. It intended something. Even nowadays, track stays are typical language, able to stir emotion without words, to create network without walls. In a virtual global overflowing with noise, historic track reminds us that sound can be sacred, that rhythm may be memory and melody, a thread among worlds. Whether or not whispered from a gin, shouted through a conflict drum, or piped from a clay flute, the songs of our ancestors still echo. We simply should pay attention.